I'm Vincent, 47 male. I live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and the constant hum of the dryers is the soundtrack to my life. I drive for a rideshare service, a job where you become invisible, just a part of the car that gets people from A to B. This wasn't always my life, but it's my life now. This is the story of how being publicly humiliated by my own son, in front of the man who replaced me, led to a discovery that changed everything. It's a story about losing it all, only to find a legacy worth more than hundreds of millions of dollars. A legacy that had been buried for 40 years. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The digital clock on my nightstand read 5:15 a.m. I didn't need an alarm anymore. My body was conditioned to the rhythm of anxiety, a jolt of cortisol that was more effective than any alarm tone. Downstairs, the first spin cycle of the day started, a low rumble that vibrated through my floorboards. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet landing on the cold, peeling linoleum that covered the floor of my apartment. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the city wake up outside my window, the distant wail of a siren, the hiss of a bus's air brakes. This was my world now, a 450-square-foot box in Columbus, Ohio, a place where the ghosts of my former life lingered in every corner. 10 years ago, my reality was a four-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb, a thriving logistics company with my name on the door, and a family that felt like my greatest accomplishment. Harlow Logistics wasn't a corporate giant, but it was mine. We had 15 trucks, 25 employees, and a reputation for reliability that I had built from the ground up. I was Vincent Harlow, a man people respected. I coached my son Leo's little league team, the Raptors. I remember the smell of freshly cut grass, the crack of the bat, and the sight of my wife Isabel setting out orange slices for the team. We were a portrait of suburban success, a life built on hard work and predictability. Isabel used to say she loved that about me. "You're so dependable, Vince," she'd tell me. "You're a rock." I didn't realize at the time that rocks can't adapt, they just get worn down or broken. The break came in 2020. A global supply chain crisis hit small players like me the hardest. A key client, a manufacturing firm that accounted for nearly half my business, went under overnight. They owed me over $400,000, a debt I would never collect. The dominoes fell quickly after that. Fuel costs skyrocketed, insurance premiums tripled. I started selling off trucks just to make payroll for the loyal guys who had been with me for years. It wasn't enough. The day I had to gather my team in the warehouse and tell them I was closing the doors for good was the day a part of me died. I saw the fear in their eyes, men with mortgages and families, and their disappointment in me felt like a physical weight. Isabel saw the fight go out of me. The man she married, the rock, had crumbled. "You've given up, Vince," she'd said during one of our final arguments in our cavernous, empty house. The furniture had already been sold to pay off creditors. "You're not even trying anymore." She was right. The failure was so total, so absolute, that I couldn't see a way back. She filed for divorce a month later. It was quick and clean. She didn't want to fight, she just wanted out. She soon found it with Julian Croft, a pharmaceutical executive with a portfolio of patents and a sprawling mansion in a gated community. He was everything I wasn't anymore: successful, confident, and wealthy. My son Leo was 14 at the time. He saw his mother's new life, the effortless luxury, and then he looked at me, his father, who was moving into a tiny apartment above a laundromat. The choice for a teenager was painfully simple. Now my days were measured in trips and ratings. I'd start before dawn chasing the airport fares, the only ones that made a real difference in my bottom line. My 2012 sedan was my office, my prison, and my confessional. I listened to people's stories, their promotions, their breakups, their vacation plans, all while my own life was stuck in neutral. I had a small notebook where I tracked every dollar. Gas, $90 a week. Insurance, $160 a month. Child support, $450, a reduced amount the court granted after my bankruptcy, but a sum that still felt like a mountain each month. After all expenses, I was lucky to clear a few $100s. It was a life of subtraction, of constantly calculating what I could do without. Hot water was a luxury. A new pair of shoes was a fantasy. The worst part wasn't the poverty, it was the shame. It was the feeling of being invisible. I drove executives to gleaming office towers where they made deals worth more than I'd earned in my entire life. I picked up college kids from bars in neighborhoods where I used to own a home, listening to them complain about problems that felt like luxuries to me. I was a ghost haunting the edges of my old life. The only connection I had to that life was Leo. Our calls were brief and strained, filled with long, awkward silences. He lived in a world of country clubs, private tutors, and European vacations. I lived in a world of instant noodles and overdue bills. The gulf between us grew wider with every passing day. He was becoming a stranger, one who was embarrassed by the man I had become. I knew his 16th birthday was approaching, a milestone I was desperate to get right. For 3 months, I'd been scrimping, putting away $5 or $10 whenever I could, skipping meals to save a little extra. I was determined to give him something meaningful, something to show him that his father, despite everything, still cared. I had my eye on a high-end microphone he'd mentioned wanting for his gaming streams. It cost $250, a fortune for me, but I was close. I just needed one more good week. I just wanted one day to feel like a father again, not a failure. The date, February 18th, had been a beacon for months. It was Leo's 16th birthday, and I was holding a neatly wrapped gift on the passenger seat of my car. The microphone had cost me nearly every spare dollar I'd made in the last month, but as I drove toward the gilded gates of Julian Croft's neighborhood, the weight of the gift felt validating. It was proof that I could still provide, even in a small way. The security guard at the gatehouse eyed my 10-year-old sedan with suspicion before checking my name on his list. Vincent Harlow, visiting the Croft residence, he announced into his radio, his voice dripping with professional boredom. The words stung. I wasn't family, I was a visitor. The house was less a home and more a monument to wealth. It was a sprawling modern structure of glass and white stone, with a driveway that curved around a manicured lawn that looked impossibly green for February. Cars that looked like they belonged in a showroom were parked along the drive, a Porsche, a Range Rover, a couple of Teslas. I found a spot at the far end, my dusty car looking like a stray that had wandered into a pedigree dog show. I could hear the thumping bass of music and the chatter of teenagers from inside. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the gift and walked toward the massive front door. Leo answered, and for a moment my heart ached. He was taller, his features sharper than I remembered from our last brief meeting 3 months ago. He was wearing a designer sweatshirt that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. "Oh hey," he said, his eyes darting back over his shoulder toward his friends. There was no warmth in his greeting, only the weary tolerance of someone performing a chore. "You came." "Happy birthday, son," I said, forcing a smile. I tried to hand him the gift, but he gestured for me to come inside. The foyer was vast and sterile, with a chandelier that looked like a crystal explosion hanging from the 2-story ceiling. Teenagers were everywhere, laughing and recording videos on their phones. None of them looked at me for more than a second before dismissing me as irrelevant. Just as I was about to try speaking with Leo again, Julian Croft emerged from the crowd, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. He was handsome in that generic, expensive way, perfectly coiffed hair, a tailored polo shirt, and a watch that could have paid my rent for a decade. He put a proprietary arm around Leo's shoulder. "Vince, perfect timing. We were just about to unveil the big surprise. Come on out back." He led the way through the house to a massive stone patio overlooking a pool that was currently covered for the winter. A crowd of about 40 people, kids and adults, were gathered, all looking toward the driveway, and that's when I saw it. Parked in the center of the circular drive was a brand-new charcoal gray Audi sports car, adorned with a ridiculously large red bow. It gleamed under the afternoon sun, a silent, powerful testament to everything I couldn't offer. "A brand new S5, Julian announced, his voice booming with practiced showmanship. "Custom ordered, fully loaded, nothing but the best for my boy on his big day." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Leo's face was a mask of pure ecstasy. He ran to the car, his friends swarming around him, their phones all out, capturing the moment for social media. He didn't even glance back at me. I stood frozen on the patio, the $250 gift in my hand, suddenly feeling as small and pathetic as a pebble. Isabel drifted over to me, holding a glass of champagne. She looked flawless, dressed in an elegant but casual outfit that screamed effortless wealth. "Isn't Julian amazing?" she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Leo was so surprised. She finally nodded. "Ed, the gift in my hand." "Oh, what did you get him?" she asked, her tone laced with a pity that was worse than malice. She was intentionally setting me up for humiliation, positioning me as the pauper at the prince's feast. I didn't get a chance to answer. Leo was climbing out of the driver's seat, his face flushed with excitement. He saw me standing there with Isabel and walked over, his friends trailing behind him like a royal entourage. "It's the microphone you wanted," I said, my voice sounding weak and thin. I held the gift out to him. "For your streaming." Leo didn't take it. He just stared at the box for a second before letting out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, thanks, but Julian already got me a professional studio set up last month, the whole thing, you know, with a boom arm and a mixer." He said it casually, but the words were surgical, designed to sever the last, fragile thread of our connection. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Every eye was on me. I saw one of his friends whisper something to another, followed by a snicker. In that moment, I was a punchline, the broke dad with his clearance bin gift. That's when Leo's expression hardened. The indifference was replaced by a cold, sharpened anger that I hadn't seen before. "You know what, I'm just going to say it," he announced, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "Why do you even bother showing up to things like this? It's just embarrassing." Leo, Isabel warned, but there was no force behind it. "No, really," he continued, turning his full attention to me. The crowd was silent, filming. "You lost the business, you lost the house, you lost mom, you show up here in your beat-up car with some cheap gift and expect what? A hug?" Each word was a blow. "Julian provides for us, he's successful, he's not a failure. Maybe if you'd spent less time feeling sorry for yourself, you wouldn't have lost everything." I wanted to defend myself, to say something, anything. But my throat was tight, the words trapped behind a wall of shame. He was just a kid who had absorbed the values of the world he now inhabited, a world where a man's worth was measured by the car he drove and the gifts he could afford. "I want to live here full-time," he said, looking from me to his mother and Julian. "I'm done pretending we're still some kind of family. You're pathetic, Dad." He spat the last word out like it was poison. Then he turned his back on me and walked back to his new car, the symbol of his choice. I stood there, rooted to the spot as the party resumed around me, the moment of my humiliation already becoming an old anecdote. I looked at Isabel and Julian. She wouldn't meet my eyes. He just gave me a small, triumphant smirk. I had been defeated. I placed the unwrapped gift on an empty table, turned and walked away, the sound of my son's laughter following me all the way back to my car. The 2 weeks after Leo's birthday were a gray, featureless blur. I worked relentlessly, taking every ride that popped up on my phone, driving until my eyes burned and my back ached. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford because when I closed my eyes, all I could see was the contempt on my son's face and the triumphant smirk on Julian's. I texted Leo 5 times. "I love you. Can we please talk? I'm sorry." The messages were all marked as delivered, but they remained unanswered. On the 8th day, I tried to send another, but this time I got an automated reply: "Message blocking is active." He had blocked my number. The finality of it felt like a door slamming shut in a long, dark hallway. I was officially an outcast from my own son's life. It was on a Tuesday morning, the first day of March, that everything changed. A cold, persistent drizzle was falling over the city, and my apartment felt even more dreary than usual. I was standing in my small kitchen, waiting for the water in my microwave to get hot enough for a cup of instant coffee, when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from my front door. It wasn't the gentle tap of my elderly neighbor asking to borrow sugar. This was a knock with purpose. My first thought was the landlord, coming to complain about my rent being a few days late. My second, more terrifying thought was a child support officer. I was a week behind on my payment to Isabel, and I knew they didn't take that lightly. I peered through the peephole and saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she was wearing a crisp, dark pantsuit that looked completely out of place in the dingy hallway of my building. She held a professional-looking leather portfolio under one arm. Bracing myself for the worst, I opened the door. "Mr. Vincent Harlow?" she asked. Her voice was calm and professional, devoid of any emotion. "Yes," I said, my own voice betraying my nervousness. "Look, if this is about the child support payment, I can have it by the end of the week. I've just had a couple of slow days." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "I'm not here about child support, Mr. Harlow. My name is Agent Diana Vance." She opened her wallet to reveal a gold badge and an ID card. "United States Patent and Trademark Office, Division of Classified Archives." The words made no sense to me. It felt like she was speaking a foreign language. "May I come in for a moment?" Confused and slightly stunned, I stepped aside and let her in. She took in my small, cluttered apartment with a quick, sweeping glance that missed nothing: the pile of unfolded laundry on my only armchair, the stack of ramen noodle cups by the sink, the general air of quiet desperation. She walked to my small, wobbly dining table and placed her portfolio on it. "Mr. Harlow," she began, getting straight to the point. "Are you the son of Arthur Harlow, born June 2nd, 1945, deceased October 11th, 1982? "Yes, that was my father," I said. "He died when I was 7. What is this about? My dad sold farm equipment. He wasn't exactly a secret agent." Agent Vance didn't smile. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a tablet. With a few taps, she brought up a series of scanned, official-looking documents. "Your father, Mr. Harlow, was more than a salesman. Between 1978 and 1981, he was granted 17 patents for a series of inventions related to passive water purification technology." She turned the tablet toward me. I saw technical drawings, complex chemical formulas, and my father's name signed at the bottom of each page. It was a revolutionary system using a unique ceramic silver ion membrane. It could render even the most contaminated water potable without any need for electricity or replaceable parts. I shook my head, completely bewildered. That's impossible. My mother told me he just tinkered with junk in the garage. She said he left us with nothing but debt. Your mother was likely unaware of the true nature of his work, Agent Vance continued, her tone even. In 1982, your father's patents were classified by the Department of Defense under the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. His technology was deemed a matter of critical national security during the Cold War. For the last 40 years, the U.S. military and various intelligence agencies have been using derivatives of his designs in covert operations, and for personnel in hostile environments around the world. My mind was reeling. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. My father, the man my mother had painted as a failed dreamer, was a secret genius inventor for the government. The 40-year classification period on his primary patent expired last month, she explained, pulling up another document filled with dense legal text and redacted lines. As per federal law, a review was conducted and the secrecy order has been lifted. As his sole living heir, his estate is now due 40 years of retroactive licensing fees from the U.S. government. Licensing fees? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How much are we talking about? I was thinking maybe a few $1,000s. Enough to catch up on my bills, maybe fix the dent in my car door. Agent Vance looked at me directly, her expression unchanging. The initial disbursement, which includes back payments, accrued interest, and penalties for the extended classification, has been calculated at $267 million. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a raw, broken, hysterical bark of disbelief. Right, okay, is this a prank show? Are there cameras somewhere? I can assure you, Mr. Harlow, this is very real, she said calmly. She slid a thick official document across the table. It was printed on heavy cream-colored paper bearing the embossed seal of the Department of the Treasury. I picked it up, my hands trembling. I saw my father's name, my name, and then I saw the number printed out in both numerals and words so there could be no mistake. $267 million. It didn't seem possible. My father had died of a heart attack at 37, a man my mother always described as being broken by his own failures. We had been so poor after he died that we relied on charity from our church for groceries. How could any of this be real? Furthermore, Agent Vance added, pulling my attention back to her. Now that the patents are declassified, your father's estate is entitled to ongoing royalties from any future commercial applications of the technology. My head was spinning. One minute I was worried about my late rent, and the next I was being told I was a multimillionaire. It felt like a dream, a hallucination brought on by too little sleep and too much cheap coffee. However, she said, and that one word hung in the air, heavy with implication. There is one complication, a stipulation in your father's will which was sealed along with his patents. She handed me a faded, yellowed envelope. I recognized my father's neat, cursive handwriting instantly. My name, Vincent, was written on the front. This was real. This was happening. My hands shook as I took the envelope from Agent Vance. It felt strangely warm, a tangible link to a father I barely remembered. He was a ghost in my life, a collection of faded photographs and my mother's bitter stories. Yet here was his handwriting, clear and steady, a voice from 40 years in the past. Agent Vance stood by respectfully as I carefully opened the sealed flap. Inside was a single sheet of legal paper folded twice. I unfolded it and began to read the words my father had written for me. To my son Vincent, the letter began, my throat tightened. If you are holding this letter, it means the world has finally caught up to my work and the government has released what it took from us. But the money, son, the money is the least important part of this. It's a tool, nothing more. What truly matters is that you understand the purpose behind the patents. The letter went on to describe a condition, a final request that was woven into the legal fabric of his will. Before you can claim this inheritance, you must complete one task. You must go to my old workshop, the one behind the irrigation supply store at 447 Riverside Road in Zanesville. There, hidden beneath the floorboards under my main workbench, is a box. It contains my journals, a prototype, and the full story of why I dedicated my life to this work. But you cannot go alone. This is the most important part, Vince. You must bring my grandson with you. You must bring your son. I looked up from the letter, my eyes wide with disbelief. My son, he didn't even know if I would have a son. The legal language of the will is precise, Agent Vance clarified. It states his direct male heir of the next generation. He was planning for a legacy. The condition is absolute. You and your son must retrieve the contents of that box together. Only then can I authorize the release of the funds. My son, he won't even speak to me, I said, the words tasting like ash. He blocked my number, he thinks I'm a pathetic failure. Agent Vance's professional demeanor softened for the first time, a flicker of empathy in her eyes. Your father's letter concludes with this, she said, gesturing to the paper in my hand. I looked down and read the final lines aloud. This legacy is not about wealth, son. It is about worth. It is about solving problems that matter. It is a lesson I fear I failed to teach you in my short time on this earth. It is a lesson I need you to learn with your own son together. The world will tell you that success is what you have in the bank. I need you both to understand that true success is the impact you have on the world. You have 30 days from today to fulfill the condition, Agent Vance said, her professional tone returning. If the condition is not met, the entire sum, including all future royalties, will be permanently absorbed by the federal government's General Research and Development Fund. Here is my card. Contact me when you and your son have completed the task. With that, she gathered her things and left, leaving me alone in my tiny apartment with a ghost, a fortune, and an impossible choice. It took 2 days of agonizing effort just to get Isabel on the phone. My first half-dozen calls went straight to her voicemail. Finally, I sent a text message, swallowing my pride and begging her. Isabel, this is not about me. It is a legal matter concerning an inheritance from my father. It requires Leo's participation. It is urgent and life-changing. The phrase life-changing was the hook. An hour later, she called back, her voice impatient and suspicious. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, leaving out the exact dollar amount but emphasizing that it was a significant inheritance with a non-negotiable condition. She was silent for a long time before finally sighing. Fine. I'll bring him to the Starbucks on High Street tomorrow at 4. You get 10 minutes, Vince, don't make a scene. The next day, I sat at a small table in the bustling coffee shop, nursing a black coffee I couldn't afford. Leo arrived 15 minutes late, strolling in with his AirPods in, not even bothering to look around for me until he had ordered an elaborate $7 iced latte. He sat down opposite me and pulled out one earbud. Mom said I had to be here. What's up? The casual indifference was like a physical blow, but I pushed through the hurt. Something has happened, Leo. It's about your grandfather, my dad. He scoffed, the guy who died broke, what about him? I took a deep breath and slid a picture of the Treasury document across the table on my phone. His eyes scanned the text, then widened as they landed on the number. He slowly pulled out his other earbud. Is this a joke? It's real, I said quietly. Every penny of it, but we can't touch it, not unless we do something together first. It was his last wish, a condition in his will. We have to go to his old workshop and find something he left for us. Suspicion immediately clouded his face. He'd been raised by Julian now, he'd been taught to look for the angle. Why would he make that a condition? He never even met me. I don't know, Leo. I think he wanted us to understand something. Something he believed was more important than the money. Leo leaned back, his expression calculating. For the first time, he looked at me not as a failure, but as a variable in a very large equation. If we do this, how much of it would be mine? The question was so transactional, so clinical, that it broke my heart. This was Julian's influence, plain and simple. That's not the point, I said, my frustration rising. It's totally the point, he shot back. How much? I sighed, defeated. I don't know, half, a third, we'd figure it out. Leo, please, this is about more than just a payout. This is about our family, about a grandfather you never knew. He was silent for a long time, staring at the number on my phone. The greed in his eyes was warring with his contempt for me. Finally, he looked up. Fine, one trip, that's it, and I'm driving my own car. I'll meet you there. Text me the address. He stood up, put his AirPods back in, and walked out without another word, leaving his half-finished drink on the table. It wasn't the heartfelt reunion I had hoped for, but it was a start. It was the only chance I had. 2 days later, I was standing in front of 447 Riverside Road in Zanesville, Ohio. The building was a skeleton, a long-abandoned metal warehouse that was slowly surrendering to nature. The sign, which once proudly read Harlow Irrigation and Supply, was now a mosaic of rust and grime, the letters barely legible. Windows were boarded up, and a thicket of weeds had conquered the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. It looked less like a place of business and more like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie. I parked my sedan next to Leo's gleaming new Audi. The contrast was almost comical, the symbol of his new life parked outside the decaying relic of my old one. Leo got out of his car, his expression a mixture of disgust and disbelief. This is it. Grandpa worked in this dump. Apparently, he did a lot more than just work here, I said, pulling a crowbar I'd bought from the trunk of my car. The front door was padlocked, but the chain was so corroded that it snapped after a few sharp yanks. The door groaned open, revealing a cavern of shadows and dust. The air inside was thick and stale, smelling of rust, damp earth, and decaying paper. Shafts of pale light cut through the gloom from holes in the corrugated metal roof, illuminating swirling dust motes. The space was littered with the ghosts of my father's business, obsolete irrigation pumps, coils of brittle tubing, and stacks of faded invoices that had turned to mulch. It was a tomb of forgotten ambitions. The letter said the workbench was in the back corner, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. We navigated through the mechanical graveyard, our footsteps echoing eerily. In the far corner, almost hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit, was the workbench. It was a massive, sturdy table made of thick oak planks, its surface scarred with the marks of countless projects. Unlike everything else in the workshop, it felt solid and timeless, as if it had been built to withstand the decay that had consumed everything around it. This was where he worked. This was where he had created things that changed the world, all while my mother thought he was just wasting his time. Under the floorboards, Leo said, more to himself than to me, we knelt and I slid the edge of the crowbar into a crack between two of the heavy planks. They resisted at first, but then with a groan of old nails, the first board came loose. Leo helped me pull it up. The wood had been cut and grooved in a way that made it clear they were designed to be removed. Beneath them was not dirt, but a hollow space. And nestled in that space was a sleek, dark gray metal box. It was vacuum-sealed and looked brand new, completely untouched by the 40 years of neglect that surrounded it. Together, we lifted the box out. It was heavier than I expected. We carried it to the workbench, the one flat, clean surface in the entire building, and I unlatched the clasps. As I lifted the lid, it felt like opening a time capsule. Inside, perfectly preserved, were 3 items. The first was a thick leather-bound journal, its pages filled with my father's dense, neat script, interspersed with complex diagrams and mathematical equations. The second was a cylindrical metal object about the size of a thermos. It had an intake valve on one end and a spout on the other. It was clearly a prototype, but it was beautifully machined, solid, and surprisingly elegant. The third item was another envelope, this one with the single word Vincent written on the front. My hands trembled as I opened this. Second letter, a direct message from my father to me. Leo stood beside me, silent for once, his attention fully fixed on the history unfolding before us. I took a deep breath and began to read aloud. My dearest Vincent, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means you have found my legacy. By now you know about the government, the patents, and the money, but I need you to understand that the money was never the goal. It was a byproduct of the purpose. In 1979, I took a trip with our church to a small village in Central America. I saw things there that I could never unsee. I saw children, babies, dying of cholera because the only water they had was from a contaminated river. I held the hand of a mother as her 2-year-old son passed away. She had a name for the river. She called it the thief of children. I came home a different man. Your mother thought I was losing my mind. She said I was obsessed. She was right. I poured every spare moment and every spare dollar into this workshop, trying to solve an impossible problem: how to create a water filter that could work anywhere without power, without expensive replacement parts, and could last a lifetime. This prototype in the box is the result. It can purify over 1 million gallons of water. The journal contains all my research, my designs, my failures, and my breakthroughs. The government took my invention for its soldiers, but my dream was always for it to reach people like that mother in the village. They classified my work, and I died before I could see that dream realized. Your mother never understood. She saw the time I spent here as time I was stealing from our family. She saw the money I spent on parts as money I was taking from our table. She saw a dreamer, a failure. I pray that you, my son, will see the truth. This was never about escaping my family. It was about trying to build a better world for all families. The money can give you a comfortable life, but the knowledge in this journal can give you a meaningful one. Use the money wisely, Vincent, but please use the knowledge better. Teach your son what I could not be there to teach you, that a man's worth is not in his bank balance, but in the problems he is willing to solve for others. I finished reading, my voice thick with emotion. The silence in the workshop was profound. The dusty, forgotten space no longer felt like a tomb, it felt like a sanctuary. This was the legacy my father had left us, not the money but the mission. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of my father's words settled over us, changing the very atmosphere of the decaying workshop. The story I had been told my whole life, the narrative of a failed, neglectful dreamer, had been obliterated, replaced by the portrait of a quiet, determined hero. I looked at the prototype filter, then at the journal filled with his genius, and finally at my son. Leo's face was unreadable. He reached out and picked up the filter, turning it over and over in his hands. It was heavier than it looked, a solid piece of engineering. He ran his thumb over the cool, smooth metal. Without saying a word, he walked to the entrance of the workshop, stepped outside into the drizzle, and knelt by a large, muddy puddle in the cracked parking lot. I followed him, watching as he unscrewed the cap from the intake valve and scooped up the murky, brown water. He screwed the cap back on, then walked back to the workbench. He held the device over an old, dusty coffee mug we'd found on a shelf. He hesitated for a second, then tilted it. A stream of water trickled from the spout into the mug. It was perfectly, astonishingly clear. 40 years, Leo said, his voice quiet and filled with awe. This thing has been sitting in a box for 40 years and it still works. He looked from the clear water in the mug to the decaying workshop around us, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the two. He built things to last. This was the moment of confrontation. It wasn't a loud, angry argument. It was a quiet internal collision with the truth. For Leo, it was a confrontation with the shallow, materialistic values he had so readily embraced. For me, it was a confrontation with the resentment I had harbored against a father I had never truly known. We weren't just standing in a dusty old building. We were standing at the intersection of 3 generations of Harlow men, finally understanding our shared story. Dad, Leo said, turning to face me. He didn't look at me with contempt or pity anymore. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. I am so sorry. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of all the hurt that had passed between us. What I said at my birthday party, everything, it was horrible. I was horrible. You were a kid, Leo, I said, my own voice cracking. You were caught up in a world that teaches you all the wrong things are important. That's not an excuse, he insisted, shaking his head. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears. Julian, he taught me to see people in terms of what they could do for you, what they were worth in dollars. I looked at you and all I saw was what you couldn't give me. I never once stopped to think about what you had given me. He gestured around the workshop. This is our family. This is what we come from, not a new car. He looked down at the keys to his Audi, which he still held in his hand as if seeing them for the first time. The symbol of his stepfather's affection now seemed cheap and hollow. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. Your grandfather wasn't a failure, Leo. He was just rich in a currency that most people don't recognize. We have to do something with this, Leo said with a sudden urgency, tapping the leather-bound journal. We can't just take the money and let this sit in another box. He wanted us to use the knowledge. In that moment, something shifted between us. The chasm that had been carved out by divorce, bankruptcy, and bitterness was bridged. We were no longer a broken father and a resentful son. We were partners, the inheritors of a mission. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on Agent Vance's card. She answered on the second ring. Agent Vance, this is Vincent Harlow, I said, my voice steady and clear. My son and I are at the workshop. We've found the box. We've fulfilled the condition. Excellent, Mr. Harlow, she replied crisply. I will document the completion. A financial advisor from the Treasury Department will be in contact with you within 24 hours to arrange the transfer of funds. Congratulations. I hung up the phone and looked at my son. He was paging through his grandfather's journal, his expression a mixture of fascination and reverence. The complex equations and technical drawings that looked like a foreign language to me seemed to captivate him. I realized with a start that my son, the kid who had seemed interested only in video games and designer clothes, had his grandfather's mind. The engineering genius had skipped a generation, but it had found its home in Leo. What do we do first? He asked, looking up from the journal. First, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. We get this place cleaned up. This isn't the end of your grandfather's story, it's the beginning of ours. We stood there for a long time, father and son, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, but for the first time in years looking toward the same future. The confrontation was over and we had both won. We had found something far more valuable than a fortune. We had found our purpose, and in doing so, we had found each other again. The money arrived 3 days later. Seeing the number in my new bank account felt surreal, like looking at a phone number instead of a balance. $267 million. It was an amount so vast it seemed purely theoretical. But the real change wasn't in my finances. It was in the air I breathed, the way I walked, the purpose that now fueled my days. The first thing I did was write a check to Isabel for all the back child support, adding a significant amount on top of it. There was no gloating, no victory lap. It was simply a debt paid. The week after our trip to Zanesville, Leo moved out of Julian's mansion and in with me. We rented a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house back in my old suburb, not far from the baseball fields where I used to coach his team. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a home. The oversized garage became our new headquarters. We spread my father's journals and blueprints across a set of tables and got to work. It turned out Leo had a natural, intuitive grasp of engineering. He devoured my father's notes, reverse engineering the 40-year-old designs and finding ways to make them even more efficient. using modern materials and manufacturing techniques. Within 3 months, we had established the Harlow Water Foundation. Our first major project was not in some distant country, but in a struggling community in our own backyard, where an aging infrastructure had left residents with unsafe drinking water. We partnered with local leaders, hired a small team, including two of my most loyal employees from my old logistics company, and began producing and installing updated versions of my father's filters, providing them at no cost to hundreds of families. The news of a local, down-on-his-luck man inheriting a fortune and using it for philanthropy became a local media sensation. It was during a TV interview that I learned what had happened to Julian Croft. A federal investigation had exposed his company for systematically buying up patents for life-saving drugs and then jacking up the prices by thousands of percent. The man who had called me a failure and bought my son's affection with an Audi was facing a litany of charges for his predatory business practices. His empire, built on the suffering of others, was crumbling. Isabel called me a few weeks after the news broke. She sounded different, hesitant, fragile. She suggested we meet for coffee to talk. We met at the same Starbucks where I had begged my son for a chance. She told me Julian's assets were frozen and that she might lose everything. We had something good once, Vince, she said, trying to summon a warmth that was no longer there. Maybe we could find that again. I looked at the woman across from me and felt nothing but a quiet sadness for her. I can help you with your legal fees, Isabel, I offered gently. But that bridge is gone. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only serve as a lesson. A year after finding the box, we held the grand opening for the Arthur Harlow Center for Water Innovation. We had bought the entire plot of land where my father's workshop stood. We carefully restored the old workshop itself, turning it into a small museum dedicated to his life and work. Next to it, we built a state-of-the-art research and manufacturing facility. We employed 50 people from the local community, paying them well and giving them a mission they could believe in. Standing at the podium during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I looked out at the crowd. I saw Agent Vance in the front row, giving me a rare, small smile. I saw the families we had helped. And I saw my son Leo standing beside me, no longer a boy swayed by shiny objects, but a young man with dirt on his hands and a fire in his eyes. He had sold the Audi months ago, donating the money to the foundation. He now drove a beat-up pickup truck, which he proudly claimed was better for hauling prototypes. A reporter asked me, Mr. Harlow, how does it feel to go from a rideshare driver to a multi-millionaire philanthropist overnight? I thought for a moment, my gaze landing on the restored workshop, the humble birthplace of it all. I didn't become rich when the money arrived, I said, my voice clear and strong. I became rich in that dusty old building the day I understood my father's legacy. Success isn't about what you own, it's about what you contribute. Last week, Leo called me from a small village in Guatemala. He was leading a team installing a new filtration system in the very region my father had visited over 40 years ago. Dad, you're not going to believe this, he said, his voice crackling over the satellite phone. I met an old woman here. She remembers an American who visited when she was a little girl, an engineer who promised he would find a way to make their water safe. She said he cried with her mother when her little brother got sick. I smiled, looking at the prototype filter that now sat on my desk, a permanent reminder of our purpose. Tell her the promise was kept, son. I already did, Leo replied, his voice thick with emotion. I told her a Harlow always keeps his promises. It just took us a little while to deliver. That's our legacy, not the bank account, but the promise. The understanding that a man's true worth is never measured in dollars, but in the lives he touches. My son doesn't call me pathetic anymore. He calls me Dad, and that is worth more than all the money in the world.